Hello everyone, welcome to Global Government News. Today is Friday, November 26, 2010, and I'm Darko. Welcome to this Economic News Bulletin. This is part 2 of this Economic News segment for this Friday. I recommend new listeners, if you're just joining me in this part 2, please visit my website, www.ggnonline.com. So, now that I'm done with that, let's just roll forward here. I have a lot more news to cover in this second part. Those videos kind of ate up some of my time. So this first one up is from the Mail Online. It says 9 pensioners died from cold every hour last winter as bill prices soared. And this is from the 24th, 2010. 9 elderly people died every hour from cold-related illnesses last winter against the background of soaring energy bills. Official figures show the number of deaths linked to cold over the 4-month period reached 25,400 in England and Wales, plus 2,700 in Scotland. So it says charities and energy company critics claim the UK has the highest winter death rate in Northern Europe, even worse than much colder countries such as Finland and Sweden. Americans boost spending as income grows. Says Americans earned more and spent more last month, a hopeful sign for the economy ahead of the holiday buying season. Consumers boosted their spending 0.4% in October. The Commerce Department said Wednesday that was up from 0.3% increase in September. So we're going to keep moving here. It says economy sees growth, but unemployment stays high. So everything's getting better, yet people are still out of work. The economy grew a little faster over the summer than the government first thought. But it says that the modest pickup wasn't nearly enough to significantly lower the nation's high unemployment rate. And the Federal Reserve doesn't expect the economy to improve much over the next couple of years. Well, considering that they just did what they did, which is buy on a bunch of, $600 billion? Similar to the last stimulus and the last bailout, and quantitative easing, which was buying up treasury bonds, which means that they're going to have to print money. And, speaking to a friend of mine, like I've mentioned him before, he's a little more savvier on economics than I, and he pretty much made the conclusion, or the proposed like a theory of his, that this recent dumping of the U.S. dollar by Russia and China, of course, it's a big deal, but what it means is that there's going to be a lot more U.S. dollars floating around the market. And part of these little schemes or scams or tools that these international fascists use in order to prop up this fake fraudulent economy, this fake fraudulent global economy, which relies on big government and big corporations, is, of course, you have fractional reserve banking and keeping interest rates low, and there's different things that they can do. The unemployment rate, it's really about 20%, 25%, but they keep telling you it's 10%. Well, they have ways to rig that too. But there's another way to hide inflation, and that's by keeping U.S. dollars floating, keep them moving around through different places. And it's really, not a good thing when it comes to back to the U.S. markets, where a lot of people are facing higher prices, food prices, and energy prices and utility prices. So it's a double whammy, I think, along with this quantitative easing, the dumping of the dollar by the Chinese and the Russians. Next one up is 41 states see job gains in October, most in 5 months. This is from the AP as well. Businesses and other employers added jobs in 41 states in October, the best showing in 5 months, the Labor Department said Tuesday. The figures indicate the job market is picking up a bit in most parts of the country. Even the nation's hardest hit states, Nevada and Michigan, showed declines in their unemployment rates. And just going off what I just said about the little tricks of the trade that these bankers and these globalists like to play is with the unemployment rate, is that there's people that are no longer on unemployment. That's how they get around these unemployment numbers to keep them nice and low. They don't count the people that are no longer on unemployment, but are also unemployed. But also, what you have here is people that, they ran out of benefits. So the big question that you have to ask is, well, why did the unemployment rates go down? Was it because people hired, or was it because people their benefits ran out and they're no longer claiming unemployment status, but they're still not working. So, next one up, mortgage rates stabilize after prior week's spike. It says here, after a big jump last week, home mortgage rates stabilized this week, which rates on fixed rate mortgages barely changing, according to Freddie Mac's weekly survey of conforming mortgage rates released Wednesday. And it says here, restart of foreclosures goes slowly. Bank of America Corp and J.P. Morgan Chase and Company have hit snags in efforts to restart nearly 230,000 foreclosures across the U.S., meaning some cases are likely to remain in limbo until earlier next year. And I posted a video on this where there was a Georgetown professor. And basically what he was saying was that they have an incentive to delay these foreclosures because otherwise they have to recognize it as a loss. So again, another way that these bastards get around basically going out of business because of inefficiency and, they lose money. But see, it just gets worse and worse. I mean, if you keep going, it's everywhere. So... And people, I was thinking about this yesterday. People always get kind of really aggravated when they see CEOs get, quote, golden parachutes. But before I got a little agitated by it, but I didn't really think too much about it. I knew that there was some kind of, psyops going on with that when they put stories out like that to get people kind of worked up, and that use that class warfare technique. The different types of warfare. There's class warfare, and so when the sheep see CEOs getting paid hundreds of or actually millions of dollars before they leave a company and jump ship as the company's going down after they committed a bunch of fraud, the sheep, they don't like to see that, and they want to see the government go after them, and it's like, the best thing that you can do is just to end the government. If you end the state, well, then you end corporations, because corporations wouldn't exist without the state. So then they would actually be liable. So the jerk-off that basically screwed over all their investors couldn't just get this, quote, golden parachute where he can take a bunch of money and then leave, right? Because he basically he carried out this Ponzi scheme, allowed it to happen, and the people that helped him get there, they're the ones that made the money. They're the ones that bought out and consolidated their little corporations of their power, right? So, if they didn't have corporation status, they would be fully liable, and that individual, that CEO, couldn't just jump ship with the rest of the company and the investors and shareholders' money. So instead of just going to the government to ask for solutions, you should step back for a second, look at the bigger picture, and see that they're actually the problem. Global poverty, I guess it's synonymous, right? Global government, global poverty doubled since the 1970s, since UN, and this is UNICEF and US. This is their goal, right? Is poverty, is to get people driven into these mass cities where they can just die off and live off the state, and that's basically what we're going to have. And so, of course, they did a study, and everything's good to go. Everything's going according to plan. So that's why they do these research studies, is to basically verify that what everything that they wanted to do, that their goals are being met, their objectives. The number of very poor countries had doubled in the last 30 to 40 years, while the number of people living in extreme poverty has grown twofold, a UN think tank warned Thursday. And this next one up is Ireland's budget cuts, harshest in history. And I'm going to keep moving here because I still have a bunch of news to cover. It says here, Ireland unveiled the harshest budget measures in its history Wednesday, a 4-year plan to claw back 15 billion euros or 20 billion Canadian dollars using spending cuts and extra taxes. But it says here some 24,000 state employees could lose their jobs, and sales tax could soar to 23%. Altogether, the program would cut spending by 1/5 and raise 5 billion euros in extra taxes over the next 4 years. It included welfare cuts of 2.8 billion euros and income tax increases of 1.9 billion euros. Those moves are among the steps planned to narrow the budget deficit to 3%. So basically the IMF is, IMF, usually it's synonymous, IMF, World Bank. You're going into receivership. So that's it's all part of the plan too. The plan, hey, see, it even says, the plan is a condition set by the EU and IMF for their aid in bailing out the country's troubled banking system. So there you go, folks. Ireland, Irish cutbacks pile it on for the new poor. It says here, talking about soup kitchens symbolizes the human cost of Ireland's crisis. Middle-class homeowners squeezed by rising debt and falling incomes line up for food parcels alongside foreign asylum seekers and long-term unemployed. Says these are Ireland's new poor, ordinary people with houses and jobs laid low by years of austerity and now facing even tougher times as the government slashes public sector jobs, raises taxes, and cuts social welfare. So we cut to this one from the AP. Irish banks cut over rumored raid on bondholders. Ireland's banks suffered a string of credit downgrades. So they're going to... We just heard Sir Evelyn de Rothschild talking about how they were going to go in there and bust the banks up because, they were just too big. Credit downgrades Friday, one reduced to junk bond status as speculation mounted that an EU IMF bailout of Ireland could require senior bondholders to share the massive bill. Protests in government building grounds. A nice lovely picture here of freedom and democracy taking place here on the streets. A group of demonstrators protesting against the government's handling of the economic crisis forced its way into a security era. So see, that's what democracy is. They're being represented, everything's going good, and that's exactly what the Irish people like and what they want. Children to be hit by IMF plans. Thousands of children will be hungry and cold if the government rolls out cost-cutting plans signed off by the IMF. It has been claimed a leading children's rights campaigner warned any cuts in social welfare payments or the minimum wage will directly affect underprivileged youngsters across the country. So said it called on politicians not to agree to any plan that will plunge households further below the breadline. Got to keep moving here. All these links will be posted as always. Please check them in the video's description with the headlines. So the links will be provided. It says Dublin to unveil deep austerity plan as Germany warns euro at stake in a race against time, or at least against bond vigilantes. The Irish government is to publish a stiff austerity plan on Wednesday afternoon, whose drafting was supervised by the IMF. So there you go, drafted by the IMF. That's why we call it receivership. Europe acts to contain debt crisis. Reassurances fail to stem fears that woes will infect Portugal and Spain. EU IMF aim to wrap up Irish aid package. Next, debt crisis may start in Washington. And we got to just keep moving here because we will run out of time. Spain's economy too big to fail. So here we go. EU will face a serious trouble if Spain gets embroiled in a much expected debt crisis, since it's far bigger than its other debt-stricken economies of the bloc, analysis say. So the next one up here is Portugal approves austerity measure. And I saw this. This was kind of funny when I saw this picture because they're all, yeah, all right, yeah. And, in a week they're going to be clashing with police. I'll be reading an article where it will be Portugal and Spanish citizens clash with police over austerity measures, right? And it says Portugal's parliament has approved the government's austerity budget bill for 2011 to avoid a bailout through deficit-cutting measures. So Spain on defensive as Portugal adopts austerity budget. So keep moving here. France borrows 1 billion euros to pay wages. The French government has requested more than 1 billion euros in emergency credit from its Senate to cover next month's payrolls for thousands of state workers. Doesn't look good for France. I think more strikes are on the way and more protests. But hey, Italian students protest austerity cuts. Tens of thousands of Italian students have taken part in demonstrations to protest the government's proposed education reform plans. Fresh strikes in debt-ridden Greece. So the Greeks are still protesting. Hundreds of protesters have marched through central Athens as unions stage fresh protests against the Greek government's deep austerity cut. So we're going to finish it up here, guys. Thank you for joining me in this economic news bulletin. This is Global Government News. I'm Darko, and take care.